You're about to hear 5 stories about the strangest nights a babysitter can have. Every one of these is a work of fiction, written for this channel, but if you've ever spent an evening alone in someone else's house, watching someone else's kids, you already know how loud that quiet can get. Let's get into it. Story 1: The Monitor. The baby monitor picked up a second set of breathing that night. The baby only breathes through one nose. Hannah had sat for the Whitfield family a dozen times before, always the same routine. Get 4-month-old Owen down by 8, keep the monitor within reach, spend the rest of the night on the couch with homework and the television turned low. That night was no different at first. Owen went down easily, the monitor's little screen showing his crib in grainy black and white. The audio picking up the soft, steady rhythm of a sleeping baby, exactly the way it always did. Around 10, she noticed the audio had changed. Still Owen's breathing, small and even, but underneath it, so faint she almost dismissed it as static, a second rhythm, slower, deeper, breathing in exact counterpoint to his, like something had synced its own breath to avoid overlapping with his. She went upstairs to check, telling herself it was the monitor's cheap speaker distorting, and found the nursery exactly as it should be. Owen asleep. Door closed. Nothing in the closet, nothing under the crib, nothing behind the curtain, every hiding place. Nervous babysitter checks twice. She went back downstairs and the second breathing was still there on the monitor, unchanged. Still perfectly out of sync with Owen's own breath in a way that felt less like an accident and more like consideration, like whatever it was didn't want to be noticed and was being careful about it. She called the Whitfields, tried to explain without sounding insane, and the mother's voice went quiet in a specific way before she said, carefully, that the monitor had done that before. With the sitter before Hannah, and that sitter had never come back, and they'd never quite found a way to bring it up beforehand without sounding insane themselves. Hannah asked, since they were already being honest, whether they'd ever tried a different monitor, a different brand, to rule out the equipment itself. The mother told her they had twice, both times with the exact same result, the second breathing following them from one device to the next, like it wasn't attached to the monitor at all but to the room or to Owen himself. That was the detail Hannah couldn't stop turning over on the drive home. Not a faulty speaker. Not interference from a neighbor's monitor. Something that had chosen specifically to breathe near her baby and had done it consistently. Enough for long enough that 2 different pieces of equipment had each been trusted to catch. She still took the job the following week, mostly because the Whitfields asked her directly, gently, if she'd be willing to keep sitting despite everything. She agreed on one condition of her own, that she'd sleep in the nursery itself from now on, in the armchair by the window, close enough to hear the difference between 1 set of breathing and 2 without needing a monitor to tell her at all. The first night she tried it, the second breathing came anyway, exactly where she could hear it. Clearly now without any monitor between her and it, somewhere near the closet, low and even. Perfectly out of sync with Owen's, exactly as patient as it had always sounded through the little speaker. She didn't move. She didn't turn on the light. She simply sat there until morning, telling herself that whatever it was, it had never once actually touched him in all the weeks it had been breathing near his crib, and that this apparently was going to have to be enough of a reason to keep coming back. Hannah still sits for the Whitfields sometimes. She brings her own monitor now, a second one positioned to catch the audio of the first, in case anyone ever needs proof that she wasn't imagining it. So far, the recordings have only ever caught the two breaths. She's not sure if that's reassuring. Story 2, text from upstairs. The kids were asleep in their beds. The text asking Marisol to check on them came from a phone charging in the kitchen, 2 rooms away. She'd been sitting for the Delgado twins since they were toddlers, old enough now at 8 to mostly put themselves to bed, which usually meant an easy night. Dinner, a movie, lights out by 9, the rest of the evening hers to spend on her own phone on the couch. Both kids were tucked in and quiet by 9:15 that night, and Marisol had just settled onto the couch when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check on them now. She assumed it was a wrong number, or maybe one of the parents texting from a friend's phone, and went upstairs anyway, just to be safe. Both kids were exactly where she'd left them, asleep, undisturbed. She came back down to find a second text waiting, same unknown number. They're not asleep, look. Again. She went back up immediately, faster this time, and found the same thing as before, 2 sleeping kids, nothing wrong, nothing out of place. It was on her way back down, phone in hand, that she noticed the house's landline handset sitting in its cradle in the kitchen, the little screen showing a call log entry for a text message sent 4 minutes earlier from that exact handset to her own cell number, a number the landline shouldn't have been capable of texting at all. She called the parents immediately, and the father's voice went tight in a way that told her this wasn't the first strange thing to happen in that house. He told her quickly to just get the kids and herself into the car, that he'd explain when they got home, that the landline had been unplugged in the basement for over a year and there was no reason it should have been able to do anything at all. Marisol still sits for the twins sometimes, though never past 9 now, always gone before the house has a real chance to settle into itself for the night. She's never gotten a straight answer about the landline, only a firm instruction repeated every time she arrives, to text the parents directly if anything ever asks her to check on the kids again. She asked once carefully whether the texts had ever come from that number before her. The father hesitated long enough that the silence itself was an answer, and told her only that the previous sitter had stopped taking their calls entirely, no explanation given, and that they'd chosen not to press her on why. Marisol looked the number up herself later that week, running it through every search she could think of. It returned exactly one result: a disconnected listing for the house's own landline, filed under the name of a family who, according to the property records, had moved out of that house 9 years before the Delgados ever bought it. She found one more thing in that same search, almost by accident: a decade-old local news brief about a house fire on that same street, 2 doors down from where the Delgados now lived, involving a family with 2 young children. The article never named in full, only noting briefly that both kids had been found safe, checked on in time by someone who happened to notice something wrong. Story 3, the third kid. 2 kids were on the sign-in sheet. Priya counted 3 heads at the dinner table. She'd taken a last-minute sitting job through an app, a family she'd never met before, 2 kids listed on the booking, a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, both names and ages confirmed by the mother before she left for the evening. Dinner was simple and Priya set out 3 plates without thinking, an old habit from sitting. For a family with 3 kids the week before, until she looked up and realized there were, in fact, 3 kids sitting at the table, not 2, the third a girl who looked close in age to the older sibling, quiet, polite, eating without comment. She assumed a cousin or a friend from next door had wandered in and asked casually who her new friend was. Both booked kids looked at her confused and told her there was no one else there. The third chair, when Priya looked back at it, was empty, the plate she'd set out for it untouched. She laughed it off in front of the kids, not wanting to scare them, and texted the mother to quietly ask if a neighbor's child might be expected that evening. The reply came back fast and short, "No, why, is everything okay?" She didn't mention it again, got through bath time and bedtime without incident, and was cleaning up the kitchen afterward when she noticed the third plate from dinner, the one she was certain she'd already put back in the cabinet, sitting back out on the table, a single fork resting across it, exactly the way a place setting looks after someone has finished eating and pushed back from the table. She checked on both kids one more time before the parents got home, found them both asleep. Alone, exactly as they should be. She never told the mother what she saw. She did, before she left that night, quietly ask the older sibling if he'd ever noticed anything strange in the house, phrased as gently as she could manage. He answered without hesitation, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, that his sister sometimes came to dinner, and that she'd been coming to dinner since before he was born. Priya asked carefully who he meant by his sister. He told her their mom didn't like to talk about it, and went back to his cereal without another word. She brought it up with the mother eventually, as carefully as she knew how, and watched her go very still before explaining, in a voice that made clear this was the first time she'd said it out loud to anyone outside the family, that there had been a third child once, years before the 2 Priya knew, who hadn't survived infancy, and whose old high chair still sat, unused, in the corner of the garage. Priya has, since then, made a habit of counting place settings twice before she sets the table. Anywhere she sits, just in case the number ever changes on her again. Story 4: Playroom Rules. The house had one rule above all others: never go in the playroom after the kids are in bed. Devon broke it once to grab a stray toy off the floor. He'd been sitting for the Akaffer family for months, an easy, well-paying job with one specific, oddly firm instruction from the parents on his very first night. Once the kids were down, the playroom door stayed closed, no exceptions, no explanations offered beyond a quiet request that he just trust them on it. He'd honored it without question for months, mostly because it cost him nothing, until one night the youngest, 4 years old, left her favorite stuffed rabbit sitting just inside the playroom doorway, visible from the hall, impossible for her to fall asleep without. He told himself grabbing it from just inside the doorway barely counted as going in, reached in without fully stepping through, grabbed the rabbit, and pulled the door shut again within maybe 3 seconds total. 3 seconds was long enough to notice the room wasn't dark the way an empty room should be at 10 at night with the lights off. A faint, warm glow came from somewhere near the back, behind the dollhouse, gone the instant he blinked, though the afterimage stayed with him uncomfortably long, a shape more than a color. Something crouched low to the ground. He delivered the rabbit, said nothing, and mentioned it to the parents only once, weeks later. phrased carefully as a joke about how creepy the playroom got at night. The father's face didn't treat it as a joke at all. He explained quietly that the room had belonged to an older child once, years before Devon started sitting for them, a child who no longer lived there, in a way that made clear he had no intention of explaining further. Devon still sits for the Force. He's never broken the rule again, not even for a dropped toy, and he's noticed without ever mentioning it to anyone that on the nights he sticks to it perfectly, the house stays completely silent after bedtime. On the handful of nights he's been even a few seconds late locking that door, it doesn't. He hears it most clearly through the wall of the room next to the playroom, a soft, patient scraping low to the floor, moving in the unhurried way of something in no rush at all, fully aware it has the rest of the night to wait him out. He started arriving 15 minutes early to every shift now, just to make sure the playroom door is checked, latched, and confirmed shut well before bedtime even starts, treating it less like a house rule at this point, and more like the only thing standing between an ordinary Tuesday night and one that very much isn't. He asked the mother once gently whether the rule had always existed, or whether something specific had prompted it. She told him only that the family who'd lived in the house before them had left the playroom completely empty, no furniture at all, and had asked the realtor oddly to mention that fact to whoever bought the place next, without ever explaining why it mattered. Story 5: The video call. Grandma video called to say goodnight, same as every week. This time she was standing behind Talia the entire call, in the living room, without ever once appearing on screen. Talia sat for the Ray's kids every Thursday, a routine so consistent it barely felt like work anymore, ending each night the same way, a video call to the grandmother who liked to see the kids' faces before bed, even though she lived 2 states away. That Thursday's call went normally at first, the kids waving and talking over each other, way they always did, until the youngest, 5 years old, looked past the phone screen toward the hallway behind Talia and waved at something there too, cheerfully, the way kids wave at people they recognize. Talia glanced back out of instinct. Nothing was there. The hallway sat empty, same as it had all evening. The grandmother's voice, tinny through the phone speaker, asked warmly who the child was waving. Talia said it was nothing, just being silly, and the grandmother went quiet for a moment before saying carefully that she could see someone too, on her end of the call, standing directly behind Talia in the frame, close enough that only Talia's own body was blocking a clear view of who it was. Talia turned the phone around slowly, walking it through the empty hallway, showing nothing there at all from her side. The grandmother insisted the figure was still visible on her screen the entire time, not moving, simply standing exactly where Talia had been standing a moment before, now that Talia herself had stepped out of frame. The call ended shortly after, both of them agreeing too quickly that it must have been a glitch, a trick of bad lighting on a cheap phone camera. Talia asked the grandmother before hanging up exactly what the figure had looked like, needing some concrete detail to either dismiss the whole thing or take it seriously. The grandmother went quiet again, then said only that it had been facing the camera the entire time, watching in a way that made her feel, more than anything else, like it already knew it was being seen and simply didn't care. Talia didn't mention it to the parents when they got home. She has, every Thursday since, made a point of standing with her back against a wall for the entirety of the good night call, just so there's nothing behind her left for anyone else's camera to catch, and she stopped answering when the grandmother's number calls outside of their usual scheduled time, no matter how many times it rings. If someone's ever told you a house has one strange rule you just have to follow, you might want to actually follow it. That's it for this one. If you liked it, you know what to do.